Hey, I'm Nick.
And I'm Graeme.
And this is the Dude, Where's My Code podcast, and this is episode 15. Graeme, you and I just got to talk to Rob Mensching from Fire Giant. Pretty awesome conversation. Rob was walking us through some of his journey at Microsoft and then becoming CEO of his company. Any thoughts that you wanted to share before we jump into it?
As always, we love a unique story about how someone got into management and how they've developed the thoughts and values that they have about that. And I think Rob is no exception. It's an interesting story, and anyone who wants to hear alternative ways to grow your managerial skills or seize new opportunities should definitely get something out of this one.
Awesome. Okay, well, we think you're going to love it, so thanks for watching and enjoy. You were saying basically the first two are actual different phases at Microsoft. Is that
different phases? No, because one was my career at Microsoft, and then one was this side hustle that I had at Microsoft. I called it my night job, and they were very different from each other because we were talking about a lot of different skills that managers had to have and skills that I was arguing that individual contributors should have and how they overlapped, and how as an individual contributor, you could benefit a lot by having some skills that are more managerial, stereotypically managerial, and how I was playing with those as I was going through Microsoft. And then when I retired from Microsoft and I started my own software company, of course, that's a whole different, ball of wax when you're talking about managerial skills. Right?
Cool. Okay. That's interesting. Go ahead, Graeme.
That sounds like some, early thinking that I really like around like ICs and management are not necessarily totally distinct, disparate tracks, right? Where like you say, there's overlapping skills there. And I think, I don't know, I've certainly seen places that forget that or try to ignore that and don't want to talk about the fact that they're not actually all that different. And maybe you just apply them a little bit differently to the success of your role.
Yeah, so I was lucky, I guess. I know Microsoft a lot. Like I went to University of Missouri Rolla, so in college I did an internship at Microsoft, and then that got me a full-time job, and I was there at Microsoft, and Microsoft is huge, and you can switch teams and switch industries essentially just by going across the street to another team. So it was easy to stay there. I was at Microsoft for 12 years, from Office to Windows Server, and then Windows Client, which are different, very different, to Marketplace, and then Mesh, and then Visual Studio. And none of those teams were the same at all to each other. Right. So what I liked at Microsoft, though, is that there is a track that is highly technical people. And I don't know why, but I had this idea in my head from when I was an intern. I didn't want to be a manager. And I didn't have a reason per se, other than I wanted to excel as an individual contributor. I wanted to work my way up. I wanted to be an architect. At least that's how I started. Mm-hmm. And I got really lucky because I had my first development manager. So at Microsoft, that was a skip level, I guess. So someone that had managers reporting to him. Mm. So like 30 people-ish, roughly, something like that. And very early, first couple of weeks, and they'd known me because I'd come back to the intern. I'd come back to that same org, not the same team. That team had actually been moved to Windows. I came back to the same org, and we had lunch. And it was a skip level one-on-one. He's like, "Hey, you're new to my team. I want to get to know everybody." And one of the things he said is, "What are your career aspirations?" And I was like, "This is great. I'm going to tell him I want to be an architect." And he looked at me, and he's like, "Okay, just know that being an architect, being an individual contributor, is a path that exists here, but it's harder." It is harder to advance as an individual contributor because the challenge is having a larger sphere of influence. Naturally, a manager that has more people reporting to him or her has more influence because that person can be responsible for a larger problem domain, therefore has more impact on the business, and therefore is rewarded more rapidly, typically. And so simply by being promoted from I was writing code to now I write some code and I manage 5, 6, 7 people, well, you immediately have the possibility of a larger sphere of influence. And so he's very clear with me up front that just know that your career may take it may be slower to work through it. And I remember looking at him going, yeah, no problem. I'm good. I'm set.
Wow.
And so that set me on my path for being an architect, which of course was not at all what I wanted once I figured that out, but that's how
what did architect mean to you when, like, back then when you were thinking about being an architect? Like, what were you envisioning?
So probably the quintessential example back then. So we're talking 1990, 9. I was an intern in 98, so 1999. Do you know David Cutler?
I do not know.
All right. I was afraid this might happen just because it demonstrates how old I am. David Cutler created VMS. Does that mean anything to you? No? All right. That is DEC Digital, the company that it went away a long time ago. And it ran on mini computers, not the kind we have, which are microcomputers. It ran on mini computers. So computers that were the size of half of a room. Not the whole room, just half of it. Anyway, right. It was an operating system, and it was huge. He created it. And Bill Gates famously got him to come to Microsoft and start the Windows NT project because Bill was tired of having everybody tell him that his operating system was trash because it was, all the shared, it was all cooperative sharing. It wasn't like separate processes. I mean, that Windows for work groups, like we're talking about. So, David Cutler came in, he went from VMS to WNT. He just iterated all the letters, Windows NT, and came out. And of course, Windows NT is the kernel that is Windows now. But back then It was like this huge monstrosity, really hard. Like nobody could imagine it running on microcomputers. Like there's no way that microcomputers being the things that are on our desktop now. Anyway, that dude was awesome. Right? Like he built operating systems. And he was a force of nature in the Windows team. And everybody knew of him, had heard. I mean, at Microsoft, you just knew who he was. Never saw him. He wasn't prolific. He wasn't like out there in lots of things. But he was a guy that had built something, was still building it, was still coding, was still on the team, still leading the team as a individual contributor, making things go. And so for me, he was kind of like wow, that guy has had industry impact in his space. To be able to build something like that was amazing to me. And I thought that title was architect at the time. And maybe it was at that time, but it pretty quickly turned into that architects, I learned, were like building architects. They designed a building. They put the scaffolding. And then they're like, okay, this will be great. And then everybody else goes, that's made out of pure glass. It will never stand up by itself, right? So you could get architects, we had the same thing in software. And I realized that's not what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the guy that was making those things for real. And I figured out that the title in construction was more master builder. They were the person that was in with all of the individual people working, making the thing come together, applying architecture guidelines or, the plans, following the plans when they worked and ignoring them when they didn't work. Like the building will stand because the master builder made this decision where an architect may have not. And so when I applied the real world architecture words and construction words to software, I slowly over a few years realized that what I wanted to be was a master builder. And Microsoft has that track. In the end, the highest level is kind of like distinguished engineer now, and technical fellow is like the thing above that. You've heard of Mark Russinovich?
I have not, no.
Okay. He was outside Microsoft for a long time.
Software engineering celebrities.
They're older. Like, I guess they're my generation kind of celebrities. But he's like in Windows Azure now and run designs. I don't know how much he has in individual pieces. I don't know Russinovich's story deeply, but he came from outside Microsoft to study the internals of Windows a lot, eventually came to Microsoft and has been doing very impactful things across. He's like, I think, a technical fellow. David Cutler eventually became a technical fellow. Like, these guys are gods of software. Distinguished engineers are extremely solid engineers that are like demigods, I guess you'd say, right? And I was on my path going, I want to make principal. My goal at Microsoft, the term was, in the end, when they came up with titles, was principal. That was kind of the top level. You're an engineer. After this, you turn into partner. Your relationship with the company changes. You end up being like owned by the company. The company kind of owns you. You have a much different relationship with partner.
You have to like sign in blood for that? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, so my dad's retired Navy, was in Navy, and there's a whole lot of needs of the Navy. You went where the Navy told you to go, right? So we got moved around a little bit as a kid. And at Microsoft, when you make partner, my understanding is you kind of can get moved where the company needs you to be.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. So it's that at least that was my understanding. You could go find a Microsoft person and tell me, no, that guy's completely wrong. That's not how partner works. I didn't make partner. But my goal was to make principal without having reports. Okay. I would take interns. I loved interns, but I didn't want to have reports. And it was more kind of a personal pride thing. So as my friends that started at the same time started moving up and getting reports, they started getting promoted faster than me in a lot of cases. Right. but I knew I was on a track and I was building things and I was getting somewhere with it. And so that was my goal, to build something big. That's what I wanted to do.
Is that the distinction between having direct reports and interns? Is that if it's interns, you're kind of teaching junior people, but suddenly if you have ICs, they're kind of building the thing with you? Or what's the
distinction was interns were temporary, like they weren't. And the goal for an intern was not to have them build something for you, but for them to learn how to become good engineers. So for me, that was more of a teaching role, which I enjoyed, and an education role. And so I would get interns, and I enjoyed working with the interns because they were young, they came with new ideas, which never hurts anything. And then I could try to apply to them saying, this is real software engineering, right? I know what you're learning in school. I know these things. Let's talk about actually building real software. And it's all those other things, bug management, source control, like stuff they don't teach you. There's always trying to get the interns involved in that sort of stuff in real world software engineering, because I didn't want them talking out of school and not like having any clue, or finding out later, oh my gosh, this is like engineering and not just typing in the keyboard. You know, like there's all these things. So for me, the interns were an educational thing, not a managerial role. There were managerial parts for sure.
Sure, yeah. Right. It's funny too. That's like my number one thing, like in my personal stuff on social media, when I'm talking to software engineers, I'm like, programming's part of it, but there is like a whole world outside of just like being at your desk, head down, writing code. And okay. So Rob, I'm curious. So it sounds really interesting that you're in this position where you're finding yourself like basically with interns, you're enjoying this teaching aspect.
Yep.
And I know that you had mentioned that you kind of had this next sort of phase where you were like, I think the way you described it was kind of like having these like leadership traits that don't just apply to like formal managers, but you're like, these are things that are really valuable for everyone. Is that like is this maybe a good transition to that part to see how that evolves?
Sure. So we were talking about my day job, right? The thing that I did during the day, that was the thing I was paid for, and the thing that if I didn't do well, I got fired. You know, like the thing that had to be done. And that was always top of mind. I had a night job. I started a side project where I took a technology I knew really well and a technology I didn't know really well. I stuck them together with some principles, and I started building this thing on the side that turned out to be very interesting to a lot of people. That was the Wix tool set. So it was this little software project that built installation. And I've been in set up the whole space, right? So it's like software installation thing that my friends always give me a hard time. Like, isn't that just like a batch file and a register? Like, is that not all it is?
Some files.
They knew every time they could get me, I'd just be like, okay, I'm done. I'll see you guys tomorrow. No, but so in this space, I created this tooling that ended up working its way into the company inside Microsoft, because a lot of the other tooling that existed just wasn't very good. And this had fit a perfect niche in that spot. And so I ran it because it was a night job. Anybody could get to the source code. Now, remember, this is 1999, 2000. And so I would send it to people. I'd go meet with other teams that were, at the time I was at Office, they were delivering code to Office, and their stuff was trash. Like, we just couldn't absorb it. It was blowing up Office. Office being $1 billion product, you get this appreciation for when we lose build time, we lose all these engineers, these kind of things. And that was kind of the culture that I was in, the build and the setup and the release processing in there. So I go to teams and show them this tool. They'd love it. They come back. And so over time, it started building up, and it was never a formal job. It was just, it was a thing that companies would, or that teams inside Microsoft would use, and bigger teams would adopt it. And then bigger teams would adopt it. And it was
the
never
responsibility
my job.
Kind of like increases a little bit over time.
and it was fantastic because I owned this whole little thing from start to finish. At Microsoft at that time, you had multi-year release timelines. So you'd work on something for 3 years and then finally to get out there. Where this thing, I could do incremental changes all the time and get out there. This sounds foreign to you guys. I'm sure you're like, what do you mean? We release every Friday.
This kind of sounds like you're getting this opportunity that you were talking about initially, right? Where you're like, now you have a thing. Like, you are becoming the guy with the thing.
And so from that, I would find other engineers and other teams that were doing software installation, that were generally feeling alone or trying to figure out what they were doing. And I was able to bring them in. And because it was source code, we could talk about the source code. And I'd get some guys around me. I'd get new hires. And they'd come in and I show them. I had a guy that was right next to me. He's like, oh, he's coming every day. He's like, I'm going to get fired. I'm so going to get fired. He was always worried. I was like, you're fine. Everything's fine. I'm working on this thing. He'd work. And we'd get together on Thursday nights at my house and we'd work on this project together. And we'd just have fun. We'd have pizza. We'd play some Halo. And then we'd go home at, 1 o'clock in the morning. And then we do it all again the next week. And so this tool kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'd interact with these teams that wanted to use it because all the other tooling out there wasn't getting the job done for them. And so more people would kind of come in. So I got into this relationship where I owned this project on the side with no leadership, with no management overhead, of me. And I had people coming saying, okay, I want to do this and I want to get this done. I'm like, that's fine, but we have to put it on this schedule, on this timeline, and we have to go talk to this team and make sure it fits with them.
To clarify, the way I'm interpreting this is like, this is literally like outside of Microsoft. Is that correct? Like,
no, it's all inside Microsoft from 1998 through 2004. It is solely inside Microsoft.
Okay, but
only inside Microsoft.
But it's not, I guess, the ownership of it, right? There is no like dedicated Microsoft team. No, this is something you're doing on the side, but only used in Microsoft.
Correct.
Okay.
And I left Microsoft. I left Office, the Office team, in 2002, 2003, something like that, to switch to another team. I went from Office to Windows Server. It was a good opportunity, and I love the guys in Office, but I'm gonna go do this thing. It's different. I've been in Office for 3-4 years. It was time to switch. It's like a startup, right? Every startup, people jump every 3. No, inside Microsoft is very easy. So I switched teams, and then one of the people I'd been working with on Office came to me later and said, "We're going to scrap the system we've been using to build our tools, and we want to adopt this side project." All right. It's like, great. Office will adopt this. Fantastic. So I had left for them to adopt it. There's all kinds of interesting stories that happen inside that. But they come on, and now at that point, there were like 5 of us that were routinely working together to continue to build this tool up and make it meet the needs of Office, to meet the needs of whoever. And some of them were from Office. Some of them were just random people. And some of them were like previous interns. I had a previous intern. He got hired, and he came back. He's like, no, this is fun. Let's do this. I don't remember what he was working on. I don't remember what team he was on, because he was working on this virtual team that we had built up. And so I would work with these guys to grow them so that they would become better engineers. We would go to meetings with other teams on the side, and I would call this playing PM. So I figured about every 1 day, every 2 weeks, so that's like 10% time, I would essentially ignore my job, and I would go have meetings with other teams inside Microsoft. And so this was the communicating with other teams, and that's the management kind of things of like, okay, we can meet these timelines on these deadlines. And of course, we're talking about outside company time, and we're essentially doing scheduling of people's volunteer time and making guarantees that, we'll meet these timelines for you inside. Yeah. And I mean, it sounds really crazy when you talk about it now, but we were very effective. We had a very good team. At one point, in 2004, it got released as Microsoft's first open source project, which was a whole big, huge thing, right? Microsoft didn't do open source, but of course, the way this had run, it was open source. It was, I think they call it inner source now. It was built inside the company, and the only people that could see it. And I was like, this is good enough. We should give it to more people. But it's my side job. I can't give it as a product. I can't give it as a binary. I have to give it as source code. That's what we should do. So there's a whole another story about releasing that as open source. That's not managerial. It's all, it's entertaining. But through that, I got to bring these guys along through that experience. And they got to sit down with Jim Alchin, who ran Windows at that time, who had the office next to David Cutler kind of thing, or above David Cutler. Like, seriously, these guys got to sit in the back and, say, hey, why do you work on the Wix tool set at night? And the guys would be like, oh, well, I really like releasing software. One, like I was able to, I get to, I did a lot of work. I didn't like the tooling that Office had, so I replaced it. That was the guy that came from Office. One of the guys who was an intern ended up renting the room in my house later. He's like, well, I live in Rob's basement, and everybody starts dying. So it was a really good team that we worked together, and it was always trying to get these guys more experience so they could have experiences that weren't, I'm just banging on the keyboard. And many of them became managers inside Microsoft. One left and went to Google and became a staff manager there in time. One of them left and went to a startup and did really well. And he came back later and said, you know, I learned so much from this project by being able to work really quickly and fail, make a lot of mistakes, that I was then able to go to the startup. And I just knew all these things that most of these other people out of college hadn't even done. And he was only like 3 years out of college because he'd worked so hard in this space, did such good work. He had had that opportunity to run through it. So for me, it was creating a space for all these guys to work and women. A few women. Still, Microsoft's very male heavy. But there's a few women that would get involved too. And I went through 3 generations of people where they get older, they get married, they have kids, they'd rotate out, and then new guys would come in, and then they get older and they get married, or they get promoted or not work in the space, and then I get a whole new set of people. And it was a matter of finding people inside the company that had these problems and wanted to work on the core toolset with us. Thursday nights for years.
Implication that people with families couldn't dedicate the evenings to Halo and coding.
They chose not to. No. Sure. It's not that. It's just they chose not to. I mean,
right.
I got married in 2006 and I kept doing that. Right. So it was just kind of a prerequisite. Now, granted, I met my girlfriend when I was living this life. So she knew what she was buying into.
Right.
She was also working on the installation tools, wasn't
she? Oh, no. She was not at all. She's not tech at all. She's in the healthcare system. So that was very, very purposely not tech. I didn't need more tech in my life. I was working a day job and a night job in this thing, running this whole company. So it was a fantastic opportunity to run around inside the company pretending to be program manager, release manager, CEO, marketing. It was everything. And then I could bring any of these people with me into that same space and give them the same opportunities and say, here, you can come along and be the release manager. I don't need to do all the work. And I had guys that came up and were running the release plan for certain versions while I was going off and doing some more experimental stuff for the next version.
So how did you find coaching these? I'm trying to think about from your mindset before this to, this current state of mind, how did you find coaching these people on these different things? Because prior to this, it sounded like, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, kind of I want to focus on this thing. I want to be the guy who does the thing. And now you're in this position where it's you are the guy doing the thing.
Come along.
But yeah, you have these people come along and you have to coach them through stuff. So can you comment a little bit about maybe did it feel like a natural shift? Did you just realize I need these people's support and I can be the one to help them? Or what did that look like for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I started by myself. And so I knew how far I could take it by myself. And I knew how much farther it could go if there's more people. I mean, when Office comes on board, you're not going to run it by yourself. It's again, you're talking multi-billion-dollar company. You just can't let that fail. And I'd worked there, so I felt kind of responsible for it, right? So it wasn't hard to say we need more people, to have more people involved. And people say, oh, well, then you have managerial experience. I'm like, yeah, I have managerial experience, but I got really lucky because I only got people that wanted to be there. Okay. So I did not have to go out and say, you now work for me. You now work on this thing, whether you like it or not. Okay. So I didn't have a lot of those challenges on this. It was people that wanted to be there, and they all had an agenda. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but they all had a reason why they're there. Some of them were there because it's fun. Some of them were there because they want to make a difference. Some of them were there because it was fun, and then they found out that they could get a lot of opportunities. Right. I had one guy come in that was forced. Actually, his boss sent him. And he said, go figure this thing out. We're going to be dependent on this thing. I need to know what's going on. This sounds crazy. Because
you're going to do it and you're going to like it, right?
Well, and he was like, well, you need to go figure out what this is, because I don't trust a bunch of guys that are just sitting together on Thursday nights and doing stuff. And so he came in and he ended up becoming the development manager of the .NET platform when it released.
No way.
Because the skills that he got in working between this open source project and what he was doing in Visual Studio, right? And tying that together. And we had some personalities that were bigger than the room sometimes that we had to tie together, because we had some people that had a lot of experience that wanted to go, I need to solve this very technical problem that you've not solved yet. And I'm like, you're right. That'd be great. We'd love for you to come in. And then someone else could be like, and so you get Visual Studio and Office people come together, and you'd have to glue that together. And it turns out I put him in between the two of them, and he did a fantastic job making that happen. And that's an example of a ginormous, huge amount of code that got written in a space that I personally didn't want to get into. That was just, it was really deep and hard and things like that. I was like, great. And it all came together with those three people, one person gluing two very strong minds together, and they came up with a very good solution, right? So that's an example of just putting the people that you have in places and then giving them a chance to succeed. And I got, I don't know, maybe lucky. I don't know, but it worked. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, I'm hearing like that you identified like alignments between like skills and interests, and then the opportunity that existed there, which, like in my opinion, is one of the strongest and most important skills of a manager, is like looking for where people want to grow and how they can contribute and making that a match, right?
If it was luck that they happened to show up or something, that's one thing, but it still sounds like you had to have, whether you knew it or not, like this skill set to be able to identify that and have the alignment.
And we were going to teams inside Microsoft, and a lot of times you get a lot of new people in this domain because teams would be like, "Oh, it's just a software installation. It's just a batch file. It's a bunch of files. Just copy it, right?" There's not a lot of appreciation for the challenges that are in, so they throw the new guy on it.
Okay.
The new guy would be like, just in the deep end, going, "What am I doing here? Help me!" And then they find out that we're able to go and say, "Hey, you're doing fine. Here's this. By the way, if you want to hang out, you can." And some of them show up and be like, "Whoa, this is cool. Look at all the things that I can do above and beyond what I do in my day job."
Right.
And so they would learn those things. So it was always finding a place and opportunity. Now I have another story where I went in and we met a team. It was the Surface team. You remember the big flat table for Microsoft and that? The guy that was working on that, and he was very into the holographics, and you could show how you could follow your finger and leave a little trail. He was very good, very clear. He was a very good developer, and just being underutilized, honestly. So we tried to get him involved, and he was. And then he ended up going to the .NET team and working for my other guy that worked and ran that team. And now he's like way up, and he's excelled because we're able to kind of get him out of that, because Surface ended up folding. So he ended up having this nice transition to another team by connecting him. And so like even there, it was just a networking between people inside a very large company that helped as well. So it was, and all of this none of these people, I couldn't tell any of these people what to do and have them do it.
But you were able to kind of lead them in the direction, like they're empowered, they have alignment and direction to head in and get them to do the things.
And any promise that I made for the virtual team, because I was in the meetings with other teams, I had to be able to back up. So in the end, I knew that if someone decided to bail, for whatever reason, I had to write the code. I had to keep it on. And so that's what set me up. That was a very good skill, which set me up for where I'm at now when I left Microsoft.
That's what I wanted to ask next. So that sounds like a good transition. The other thing that I wanted to kind of maybe add into that is you kind of talk about your company that you have now is really this thought about going back to, like, I'm assuming for your company, you probably can't do it all on your own. This is where you have to bring in other people, right? So now you get to take those skills that you were having about aligning people, finding people that are passionate. So I'm kind of curious about, like, finding the right people. When you find the right people, how do you align them and get them engaged and moving in the right direction? So just, turn it over to you.
Yeah, sure. So honestly, the skills that I developed through this whole virtual team was the exact skills I needed to run a small company. And we're a small company. I do not want to be a 500-person company. Honestly, I'm not even sure I want to be a 20-person company. Right? We're smaller than 10, right? We're a very small little company, and I like it because I still write code. I still like to write code. I like the ability to do that. And in the end, it's the same thing as before, except now I pay them. So the relationship is a little different. Like I recognize it's not the same. Before it was I could entice people with pizza. Now it's like, now you get paid. And so one of the things I had to do differently was realize that when you pay people, what you say is it lands a little differently than when you're all just kind of pulling together on this project and things like that. And they know they can walk. I mean, of course they can walk at a company, but when you tell them, hey, I'm paying you, they're like, okay, I'm just going to do this. Because one of the things that I really fostered in this virtual team was I'm not always right. So if you think I'm wrong, just tell me. And I have to reinforce that with new people at my current company. I will say things, but if you think I'm wrong, tell me, and then we'll sort it out. So I still have a lot of the same attitudes that I did from that virtual team work that I did way back when. Finding people is near impossible still, just because we need them in this domain. I miss being able to find the new people at someone's company, someone's team in Microsoft, and just borrowing them onto your team on the side.
Scrolling through the Outlook contacts. And
it wasn't even that. It was people using the tools. So we could just go to them and say, hey, you're having a problem, or they're asking questions. And we're like, hey, let's help you solve it. Then you sit down with them and you find out what they're like. It's like a built-in interview whole process. That I'm completely missing that. And it's honestly been like one of the biggest challenges Now
That's
when the open source
interesting.
project, we're way, like, I used to be able to go and find people easily, but now on the internet, just flat out, we're back to the more typical open source problem where there are, 3 people running a project with 500,000 lines of code, and making it all go. Right. The difference now is that we're paid, and so we're focused on it, and we're able to keep a lot of that going. But it's a different problem when you get into now it's real, right? It's not just a fun project. It's not just it was real before. Making promise to office was still a big deal.
Sure, yeah.
But now it's people's livelihoods, right?
Well, yeah, people's livelihoods weren't on the line in
exactly.
the last go, and now it's.
But the skills are the same, in my opinion. Like we were talking, I think before, like, we don't do cameras at Fire Giant.
Right.
I do cameras because I've been doing some YouTube streaming, and the world has started doing cameras. But when we started Fire Giant in 2013, oh wow, 10 years ago, coming up this summer.
Congrats, by the way, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. So we didn't have cameras; it was just audio. We of course did the asynchronous communication like Slack and emails, mostly Slack. That was nice, just to be able to chat at that speed. Microsoft was all email culture. It was just deleting emails constantly with small
letters. I think I have 60,000 sitting in my inbox.
I chose not to bring that to this company, my company. So with the Slack, but also we're not afraid to just jump on a call and kind of chat things out. But one of the things, I can hear people when they're not talking and they have an issue. So I can just say, okay, so does everybody agree? And people know that they need to say yes or no, and then we need to get to a place, right? So if people disagree, they know they need to say they disagree, because I don't have any problem with people disagreeing with me. I have a problem when people disagree, don't say anything, and they get mad later. Then I'm like, okay, this is completely different. We need to talk about this when it's a problem. And so I make a lot of those things up front, just so people know, yeah, this is how it works.
And Rob, I think you had mentioned earlier, and the company's been around for 10 years now, so it's probably changed over time, but you had mentioned that the team knows each other, right? Like, it's not like totally random people pulled together. So, like, has that changed over time, where maybe some of the core people, like, knew each other really well, and you've had new hires, and they're, like, the outside coming in, and they're like, how do I get included?
I know what you're asking, and I haven't had that problem because we're not big enough.
Interesting. Okay.
It would be an interesting problem to tackle, but it's not one that I've had to tackle because we're not big enough. I think about it like, if I ever wanted to grow 5 people immediately, like, I don't have a problem that I need to grow 5 people immediately, but if I need to just, poof, double, triple, whatever, like my output, what would I do? And the more and more I think about it, the more and more I'm like, they'd have to come here, or we'd have to go somewhere for 3-6 months. Like, I'd have a real hard time hiring somebody straight out of college and then being like, okay, we're a remote company. You can live wherever you want. We're just going to go now. I don't think I could do that with a college hire. I've been able to do that with the industry hires that I pulled in, because, again, we've had the relationships. We've worked with each other. The open source project was big enough, so we'd have an understanding of a lot of things. And then I would just be able to say, here's the things that are important to me. When we report to each other, here's how it changes. And they've been in the industry long enough to know a bunch of things. If it was new hires, like straight out of college or not known in the industry, if I had to somehow acquire them, I don't know how I would, but if I had to, I think it would have to be we'd all have to go hang out somewhere for 6 months. I've thought about it, right? Like, I put them up in apartments somewhere, some temporary, housing kind of things. They could live here if they want. I'm right near Microsoft. I didn't move. But I think they'd have to come for a while and then go move wherever they want, just to kind of sit and understand that culture and what's expected of them. And the expectations are around for me, it's usually like, when I say things, here's what I mean. And a lot of it, again, comes back to, it's like, a thing I learned so early was, just tell me when I'm wrong. Just tell me when I'm wrong, or when you disagree. Just tell me, because then I'll be like, okay, we'll sort this out. Then we'll be on the same page and we'll go forward, and it won't be a problem.
So, Graeme, you and I talk about trust a lot, right? And it kind of sounds like this, like, trust and, like, level set expectations. It always kind of comes back to these things. But, like, Rob, it sounds like what you're describing is, like, sort of facilitating building this trust. And Graeme, is that kind of how you perceive that as well?
Yeah, and this whole time I was thinking about something that we talk about pretty frequently where I am, which is, if we're going to be a remote team, there are some remote norms that make us operate, and a lot of that is the openness of the way we communicate. Heavy emphasis on pairing or mobbing, or as you said earlier, just jumping on a call is a really nice cultural value to have.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you have a new team member join who isn't used to that kind of culture, in the remote world, it's actually difficult to get them in, because to get in, they have to get into.
They're so isolated. Yeah, it could be so terrible. Like I said, I haven't lived this problem, but I thought about it. If I had to bring someone in, they could be so isolated for so long and feel really alone. Like it could be really, really bad.
And to feel welcomed, they have to come into the fold, which is the thing they're afraid of in the first place. It is an interesting problem.
They have to do a little bit of work. And you talk about trust. That's actually probably a better word. I look at it as a level set. It's a foundation. It's like, this is the things that we believe. These are the things that we operate. We have a real strong culture on root causing problems.
Sure. Okay.
Which goes to, it's like, we want to know why. It's like, okay, you got to work around, but why did we have this problem? And that pervades a lot of things. Even if we don't have time now, we want to put a pin in that and come back to it and really understand those things. Because that's one of the things we offer our customers is, it's an open source project. They can have it for free. What do we offer that's different? We offer the deep knowledge that can go and solve any problem that they have. And I want us to be able to tell them why they had that problem. I don't want to tell them we'll give them the fix as rapidly as we can find the fix.
Sure.
But I also want to be able to tell them, and here's how you got into that situation. And it's on your side or it's on our side. Here's what you need to do to fix something in case it's like fundamental. And that for me is like that. And then which kind of comes back to I want a root cause. I want to know the problems as soon as possible so that we can work on them all the way up, because it just alleviates a lot of other things. We did not have a lot of personality problems in the space, mostly because I just be like, all right, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out and work it out.
That's an interesting approach, right? Like, again, Graeme and I, we've talked about this. Even one of our earlier episodes, we were kind of exploring for watching my language, like intelligent jerks, right? When you have people coming in and maybe steamrolling stuff. Yeah, you know the word. But it sounds like you've been fortunate enough to be in these situations where you communicate early. Look, like, disagree, like, cool, like, let's hash it out right away, so that you're not getting into these positions where people are building resentment. So, Rob, I was kind of curious. So we've kind of chatted through some of your journey here, and I'm trying to think through some solid takeaways. For myself, I think I have a couple, and maybe I'll start. But I was kind of curious if the question that I want to ask you and Graeme is, like, if you have a couple of sort of like nuggets that you would want to offer up for other people. But not to put you on the spot, I'll try to start. But the one thing in particular is kind of this last comment about communication and being able to establish that with people very early, like when you're working together. And I would argue especially more with remote work, this concept that, like, if you're not communicating clearly, transparently, there's just so much opportunity for stuff to break down almost like unnecessarily. So that was one part. And the other part that I have as a takeaway was kind of like reflecting earlier on your journey, this idea that, like, I can't speak for every software engineer, but a lot of the time I think about, like, people are focused on growing in their career. And sometimes as software engineers, we kind of forget that part of that growth is being able to bring up other people around us. And I just wanted to say that, like, in your journey, it sounds like you had this really cool opportunity to naturally do that. I don't want to, like, diminish that it was, like, I'm sure it was obviously hard work. So when I say naturally, I just mean, like, you had opportunities and you had the skill set to be able to do it. So I think those two things for me are really important, and would just want to remind, like, listeners and watchers that, like, these are two really important things.
I think for me, one of the things from the beginning was, as an engineer, having the communication skills that you might attribute to managers or things that you're like, that's not my job. That's not what I do. All of those things are going to benefit you. Communicating with people early and understanding how do I talk about the projects that we're doing, right? The things that we're working on together. And that, just having that foundation from the beginning is, I think, that's kind of where I start with everything. Cool. Figure out what you need to communicate with and go there. Even as an individual contributor, right? I explicitly did not want to be a manager, not because I thought managing was bad. I had it in my mind that I wanted to succeed at Microsoft by taking the hard way. Like that's
sure.
what I was doing. But even that, I knew that communication was the most important skill outside of my ability to do work, right? It's like, yes, I have to be able to program. Yes, you have to be able to do those things that are in your job description. But if you can't communicate about them, you will be there will be a ceiling that you will be hitting constantly that you will not understand. And it could just simply being able to talk to other people about it.
And that's a really
or being alone and not like knowing why you're alone. Like, again, you just have to communicate. And for me, it's something that I've always found important. Like, believe it or not, I have a communications minor because I thought it would be a good idea. I don't know what I would do with that, but it was a fun thing to have gone through in college. And so implicitly, I was just like, seems really important to know these things. And so innately, I've come that's the thing I would tell any engineer. If they don't know that already, to be working on that, because it will be huge just everywhere in life too.
In some ways you're saying, like, as much as we want to believe it will, your work doesn't always just speak for itself. You have to be able to speak for what you've done and describe what you've done and communicate.
Totally. Absolutely. My project would not be an open source project for Microsoft if I was not able to articulate what it was, and be able to sit in front of Jim Algen, right, and have him say, what does this thing do, and why should this be the project?
Look at the code, man.
What's the value? Yeah.
Code's up for review.
Well, in my case, fortunately, the value was very little to Microsoft, so they were able to give it away. Like as a product, right? It was not $1 billion industry, which is why I kept hitting these things where I'm like, this is an important piece of the world. I think it should be. And in the end, I told my boss, I'm going to leave. And he's like, oh no, are you running from something? You're running to something. I'm like, I'm going to go make this real, because it's not $1 billion industry. It's not $1 billion product, which means Microsoft isn't going to take it seriously. It's fine. That's the level they operate at. But I can go make a business on this, I think, and I want to go prove and see if it works. And so that's what I'm doing now, is going to see how it works.
Did you tell him you were running with something?
Yeah. All of your source code.
Yeah, well, it was already open source, so it wasn't like there wasn't anything to run with. It was just there. And it didn't surprise anybody. It was, it's like, like, you can only do so much in the free time before you go, I've hit a level that I can do here. Let's go make it real. And that's where it comes into it. That's what FireGiant's trying to do, is make it real in the world of open source.
Well, that's been doing it for 10 years, apparently. So
yes,
doing well.
It's not a straight line. I tell you what, startups are not easy. And you do not always it's been a lot harder. I look back and go, it's been 10 years, but it feels like we've made 2 years of progress with a whole lot of building company and things like that in there that I would not have. You had asked me in the beginning, I would have said I would be where I'm at now in 3 years. And it's, so I learned a lot through all that. And, industry changed on us and things like that. So all of that is the managerial CEO type decisions that you have to make decisions so your company doesn't disappear on you. Right. That does not have to do with the managing the people. That has to do managing your position in the industry and what is your company about. And the people that work for me are there to not follow, but be with me on that vision. So we're like making those decisions, and that's not always easy, but that's a completely different thing to manage that you have a lot less control over, because, our industry does not stand still. And that's a completely different thing. But the people's all about communication, having that foundation, trust. I think that's it.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
And Graeme, what about you? What were your thoughts and takeaways?
I just can't stop thinking about, Rob, you said this thing about there was people being underutilized on teams, and like there was this like marriage of you finding these people and them looking for something else, and how effective of a team that made is really interesting. I mean, there's definitely something there about how to build effective teams within organizations, and the loss you get, no matter how talented somebody is, when you can't get them inspired about what they're doing, or you've got them focused on the wrong thing. And I think all too often there are the types of organizations where they would actually stifle the kind of thing that you did, and it's a huge mistake. And I think as managers, it's worth being really wide-eyed about this and fostering those opportunities.
Truth be told, there are times when I did not talk about my night job. There are teams during periods of time that I did not talk about the night job, because it was not good for my career to talk about it. I still did it. I still believed in it, but I knew that it would not make my management happy. And so there was one time when another team showed up and said, he said he was going to do this. He didn't deliver it. And my manager was like, I don't care. That's not my problem. And,
Right.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from that situation. But yeah, the underutilization is actually an interesting point, and having a place where it can happen. It wasn't always, roses and everything inside Microsoft. Sometimes it was challenging, but it was always satisfying to get people inside Microsoft at whatever level they were at and giving them space to operate, right? I worked with some stellar engineers. I worked with some very, I don't know, what's a good word? Just average isn't the right word. Just people that were doing their job and happy to be doing that. And they got better, and they got, it was just, and they were happy, able to work in that space. It was just,
I think about that too, like as an engineering manager, honestly, like might sound kind of cheesy, but like, what's a better feeling than like being able to kind of rally some people around something and having them be like inspired by it? Like you're literally watching them improve and grow. And it's like, it's not to say that like you are single-handedly responsible for all of their success, nothing like that.
No.
But to be able to like just be part of that, like you are part of their growth and success is like, it's the coolest thing.
Yeah. Some of my best friends still, right? Weddings and everything. And we don't even work anywhere near each other. So good times. It was good times. Anyway, it's a different experience. It was, I just wanted to that's why I said it was different I couldn't communicate all this through Twitter. It was just a very different way of going about getting into this managerial role and finding a place. And I just think hopefully employees, if they have the desire to do this, hopefully they can find companies that let them do that within that. And hopefully companies are like, yeah, okay, let's figure out how it is. Because, still can't drop the ball in your day job. I didn't talk about my day job much through all of this. Worked on a lot of different teams, always to make sure those happen. And just had some long nights or whatever I need to do on the side to make things happen with good people.
That's super cool, Rob. So I wanted to say thank you for sharing your journey. Thanks for the nuggets of wisdom in there. Before I sign off, Graeme, anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I'm just going to co-sign. This is really interesting to hear about. We love alternative stories from the typical career path that you hear about, and it falls well within that interesting category. So thanks for your time, Rob.
Good. I'm glad I could be interesting.
Yeah, especially hearing like, the very beginning, I didn't want to be a manager. Like, no. Like, okay, well, how did you get here? Yeah, very cool. So thanks again. For listeners and watchers, thanks so much for tuning in. Do us a favor, like, subscribe, all the fun stuff. Leave a comment below. Rob, we're gonna have to get your like social media handles. Totally. I have you on Twitter, but yeah, we can add that to all this stuff, and people can check you out. And
sounds good.
Again, thanks so much.
All right,
thanks, guys.